The millionaire CEO thought he had everything under control, until two children stopped him on the street and told him who stole his laptop, and who they really were. Jason West had never walked into a room unprepared in his life. Every meeting, every deal, every handshake was calculated, structured, and delivered with flawless precision. That morning was supposed to be no different. He had flown in from Geneva overnight, skipped sleep, and reviewed his pitch 5 times on the plane. His assistant confirmed everything twice: location, clients, materials. This meeting wasn't just important, it was supposed to be the crown jewel of his career. A multi-country partnership. A deal that would set his name in stone across continents. He walked into the shimmering glass conference room in his signature navy suit, cool and focused, with the leather case in his hand that had accompanied him to 100 negotiations. The room was already full. His European and Asian partners sat waiting, their expressions curious and expectant. Jason nodded respectfully, set the case on the table, and spoke with the polished ease of a man in total control. "Thank you for your trust. Let's walk through the final numbers." He opened the briefcase. Empty. His hand froze mid-air. The laptop was gone. For a second, his mind simply refused to process it. He blinked, thinking he'd somehow looked past it. But there was nothing. No charger, no folder, no backup drive. Just clean black leather and a pit forming in his stomach. Someone coughed. One of the partners leaned forward, brow raised. Another whispered something to his colleague in Mandarin and laughed. It was quiet, almost kind, but it echoed like thunder in Jason's ears. He cleared his throat, trying to stay composed. "There seems to be a technical issue. Give me one moment." He closed the case, now feeling the eyes of the entire room tightening around him like a noose. His internal panic clawed at the walls of his confidence, but he stood still, face neutral. One of the partners stood up. "We came for details. Without data, this is just conversation. Our board expects certainty, not stories." Jason opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. His mind raced. Where had he last used the laptop? His office, last night. He had reviewed the final version, saved it, checked it again. And now, it was gone. He reached for his phone under the table, but it buzzed before he could open it. A text from his assistant: "Can't find the backup drive either. Did you take it?" Jason's blood ran cold. The meeting fell apart before his eyes. Within minutes, the room emptied with firm handshakes and tight smiles that said more than words ever could. The deal was off. He stood alone, the briefcase still open in front of him, mocked by its own emptiness. And somewhere deep in the spinning chaos of his thoughts, something darker crept in, a single, sickening possibility that this hadn't been a mistake. Someone had taken it. And they knew exactly what they were doing. Just outside the sleek glass doors of West International, two children sat silently on a bench across the street, their feet barely touching the ground. They were dressed in matching gray hoodies and sneakers, the kind that made them look like any other 6-year-olds to a passerby. But they weren't just any children. Liam and Haley had been sitting there every morning for the past week, quietly observing the man who rushed in and out of the building with the seriousness of someone who never noticed the world around him. They knew his name was Jason West. They had learned it from the newspapers their mother used to read, and from the quiet, almost aching way she said it once, the night before she was taken to the hospital. "That's your father," she had whispered, tears in her eyes but voice steady. "He never knew about you. But he should." It had been the first and only time she'd spoken about him. The twins hadn't known what to do with that truth. Their mother, Emily, had raised them on her own with more love than they could ever ask for, but now she was sick. Really sick. And the one thing she had asked, no, begged, was that they try to find him. She had given them a photo, a name, and a promise. "He's not a bad man," she had said. "He just chose the wrong road back then." Liam had taken her words like a mission, while Haley simply wanted to see him for herself. They were curious, scared, and determined. They didn't expect anything, not really. They just needed to try. So for days, they sat, watched, and waited. They memorized his routine. 7:55 a.m., Jason arrived in a black car. 8 a.m., he walked through the front doors with purpose, never glancing sideways, never pausing. Always alone. But this morning had been different. They saw the tall man in the gray suit walk past the building around 8:10, carrying a laptop bag. He wasn't Jason. But he had walked directly out of Jason's private elevator, the one they had seen him take every day. The man had looked over his shoulder twice, moving quickly but trying not to seem like he was rushing. Haley nudged Liam. "That's not normal," she whispered. Liam watched him, narrowing his eyes. "That's Jason's laptop," he said. "I saw it on his desk yesterday." Without hesitating, Liam pulled Emily's old phone from his pocket and started recording. It was an old model with a cracked corner, but it worked. He zoomed in on the man as he crossed the street and disappeared into another building. They didn't know why, but they both felt it, something important had just happened. And they had seen it. The man hadn't looked like someone dropping off a forgotten item. He looked guilty. Nervous. Wrong. Haley bit her lip. "Should we go inside? Tell someone?" Liam shook his head. "They won't listen to kids." "But maybe he will." He meant Jason. He meant their dad. Even if he didn't know yet. For the first time all week, they stood up and crossed the street. Not because they were ready, but because they knew they couldn't wait any longer. Something told them their dad needed help. And maybe, just maybe, they were the only ones who could give it. Jason stormed out of the building in disbelief, his phone pressed tightly to his ear as he barked orders at his assistant, demanding to know how it was possible for both his laptop and the backup drive to be missing at the same time. His face was a mask of control, but inside, panic was spreading fast, clawing through every part of him. The deal was dead, his credibility bruised, and the worst part wasn't even the failure itself, it was the silence. No one in that boardroom had cared to ask if something was wrong. They had assumed it was his mistake. His loss. And now, he had to deal with the fallout. He walked fast, not seeing anything around him, not the sun overhead, not the buzzing city noise, not the people who turned to glance at the man in the sharp blue suit moving like a storm down the street. But two small voices broke through his fog. They weren't loud. They weren't panicked. Just, clear. "We saw who took your laptop." Jason stopped cold. He turned and saw them. Two children. A boy and a girl, both maybe 6 years old, standing side by side on the sidewalk as if they had rehearsed this moment. His immediate instinct was confusion, maybe even suspicion. Then something strange happened. He looked into their eyes. Both pairs were a sharp, piercing blue, the exact shade he saw every morning in the mirror. The girl's chin was tilted with quiet defiance. The boy's jaw was set with focus. They didn't look scared. They looked sure. Jason crouched slightly to their level. "What did you just say?" The girl stepped forward. "A man took your laptop. He came out of the elevator and walked across the street. We have a video." Her voice was steady, practiced. The boy nodded and pulled out a worn phone. He opened the video file and handed it to Jason without hesitation. Jason took the phone slowly, and the moment the video began playing, the world around him narrowed to a single point. The footage was grainy, shaky, but clear enough. It showed a man he recognized instantly. It was Marcus Klein, his chief financial officer. A man who had worked beside him for 6 years. Someone he'd mentored, trusted, defended. In the video, Marcus glanced over his shoulder twice, pulled the laptop from Jason's desk, tucked it under his arm, and slipped out through the private corridor. Jason's throat tightened. His fingers curled around the phone. This wasn't just betrayal. This was precision. This was planned. And the only reason he now had proof of it was because of two strangers, no, not strangers. He looked up at them again. Where did you get this? The boy shrugged. We saw him. We knew it was important. Jason stared at them for a long moment, trying to piece together why these two kids, who clearly weren't supposed to be involved in anything like this, had chosen him. Then the girl said something that hit him like a punch. Our mom told us to find you. She said you're our dad. Everything around him seemed to slow. The city noise faded. The heat of the sun, the sound of footsteps, the ticking of his watch, all of it disappeared under the weight of that one sentence. Jason's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked at them again, this time really looked. The shape of their eyes, their mouths, even the way the boy stood slightly in front of his sister like he had something to protect. There was no way. And yet, something deep inside him, the part of him that never doubted data or instinct, knew it was true. The girl looked up at him and added, not with bitterness, but with calm sincerity, she didn't tell you. She thought you didn't want to know. But she got sick. So we came. Jason blinked rapidly, his mind racing to connect the impossible. A woman. A moment. A brief relationship that ended quietly, without drama, just before he made his first million. Her name had been Emily. The timing fit. But none of that mattered now. Not when two children stood in front of him offering the truth and a second chance all at once. He stood up, swallowed hard, and looked at them both. Come with me, he said. Please. They followed him without hesitation, one on each side, as he led them back toward the building he had just stormed out of, this time not to fix a deal, but to face a betrayal, reclaim his name, and start unraveling the mystery of the two lives that had just walked into his own. Jason led the children into the side entrance of the building, bypassing the front lobby where security might have questioned why a powerful executive was suddenly walking in with two 6-year-olds in tow. His keycard granted them access through the private elevator, and as the doors closed behind them, he glanced down at the twins, who stood calmly on either side of him. He could still feel the echo of their words inside him, especially hers, she said you're our dad. It didn't feel real, but it didn't feel wrong either. There was something terrifyingly familiar about them, the way they moved together like instinct, how the boy kept subtly checking that the girl stayed close, how she stared at everything with quiet alertness. Jason couldn't deny it. In his gut, he knew. They stepped out onto the executive floor, which was nearly empty now that the meeting had imploded. Jason guided them into his office and gently closed the door behind them. He set the worn phone on his desk, connected it to his computer, and transferred the video. The footage confirmed everything. Marcus Klein, his CFO, exiting Jason's office early that morning with the stolen laptop in hand. Jason watched it twice. Once in silence. Once with clenched fists. He had trusted Marcus with more than numbers, he had trusted him with strategy, with future plans, with confidential information that could ruin or build empires. And this morning, Marcus had walked out with his entire career in his arms. He turned toward the twins. Do you know what this means? The boy, Liam, he remembered, nodded slowly. That man tried to make you look bad, he said. We figured if you knew, you could stop him. Jason sat down in his chair, trying to recalibrate everything. You shouldn't have had to do that. This isn't your responsibility. The girl, Haley, responded softly. We wanted to help. Mom said you used to solve things. Big things. But sometimes people like you need help too. Jason swallowed hard, caught off guard by the strange gravity in her words. He asked about their mother, and they told him everything in a way that only children could, bits of emotion tangled in logic, facts told out of order, but the meaning sharp and clear. Emily was sick, and in the weeks before being hospitalized, she had finally told them the truth. She had never asked Jason for help. She never contacted him. She didn't want to interrupt his life, didn't want him to feel trapped. But now, with her uncertain future, she had told them everything. They had made the decision to find him on their own. They had come every day, waiting for a moment to talk to him, not knowing if he'd listen. Jason rubbed his face with both hands and leaned back in the chair. Why me? Why now? He asked more to himself than to them. Haley answered anyway. Because you're our dad. And because if you didn't want to know at least we would know we tried. That cracked something inside him he didn't know was still whole. His life had been carefully constructed around control, predictability, and success. But here were two small people who had found their way to him through nothing but courage and instinct. They didn't want anything from him except to be seen. And they had saved him before he even realized he needed saving. He looked back at the computer screen, at the frozen frame of Marcus stealing the laptop. I have to fix this first, he said. Then, we'll talk about everything else. He called security and forwarded the video to his legal team, instructing them to freeze Marcus's access and start internal proceedings. Then he turned back to Liam and Haley. But I'm not sending you away. I'm not ignoring this. And I'm not walking out. For the first time, they smiled. Just a little. And in that quiet office, surrounded by betrayal and discovery, Jason West began to understand that the most important deal of his life had just walked into his office, uninvited, unexpected, and absolutely unmissable. After forwarding the footage to security and corporate legal, Jason arranged for Marcus's credentials to be revoked immediately. Within the hour, Marcus would be escorted out of the building, and the investigation would begin. But even as the machinery of corporate accountability moved forward, Jason's thoughts were elsewhere, split between two 6-year-olds quietly coloring at the small conference table in his office and the woman he had walked away from 6 years ago without realizing what he was leaving behind. He stared at his phone for a long moment, his fingers hovering over the screen. He had no number for Emily, no contact, no idea where she was now beyond the twins' mention of a hospital. He finally turned to Haley and Liam and gently asked, "Can you tell me which hospital your mom is in?" Haley looked up and blinked slowly. "St. Gabriel's. The one near the river. She was there when we left this morning." Jason stood immediately. He sent a quick text to his driver and told the twins to gather their things. He didn't know what he was going to say when he saw her. He didn't know what kind of reception he would get or if she'd even want to see him. But he knew with absolute certainty that he needed to be there. Not just because she was the mother of his children, but because it was long past time he faced the consequences of the choices he had made. They rode in silence most of the way, the car weaving through downtown traffic while the twins sat on either side of him, tired but steady. Jason watched them in the rearview mirror more than he looked at the road ahead. He noticed the small things, how Liam held his backpack tightly in his lap, how Haley tapped her fingers rhythmically against the window as if counting. These were his children. He hadn't raised them, hadn't even known they existed, but now he could feel something unspoken forming between them. It wasn't comfort yet. It was still new, raw, and unsure. But it was real. At the hospital, Jason held the elevator door as they stepped out and made their way to the 4th floor. The nurse at the desk looked surprised when he gave Emily's full name, but after a quick call to the attending physician, she nodded and pointed him toward a quiet room at the end of the hallway. The twins walked ahead of him, but stopped just outside the door. Liam turned to him. "She might be asleep," he whispered. Jason nodded. "That's okay. I just want to see her." Inside, the room was dim, the blinds drawn, and the air heavy with antiseptic and quiet beeping machines. Emily lay on the hospital bed, thinner than he remembered, her once vibrant energy dulled by illness. But when she opened her eyes and saw him standing there, holding their children's backpacks in one hand and staring at her like he was seeing a ghost, her breath caught. She blinked once. Then again. "Jason," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a cautious step forward. "Yeah. It's me. I know. I know it's a shock. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes moved to Haley and Liam, standing just inside the room now, watching her carefully. They found you? She asked. You told them, he said gently. She nodded. I didn't want to. Not until I had to. I thought you'd moved on. You had everything. I didn't want to ruin that. Jason sat in the chair beside her bed and shook his head. You didn't ruin anything. I did that all by myself. But they saved me today. I was about to lose everything, and they were the ones who stopped it from happening. I wouldn't even know if they hadn't come forward. Emily looked at him, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. They're brave, she said softly. Braver than me. He reached for her hand carefully, unsure if she would take it. She did. I don't know what happens next, he said honestly. But I want to be here. For you. For them. If you'll let me. She didn't speak again, but her hand squeezed his just slightly. It was enough. Outside the window, the city moved on, unaware of what was beginning inside that small hospital room. But for Jason, for Emily, and for the two children who had brought them back together, the world had shifted. Not through grand gestures or perfectly timed speeches, but through quiet courage, long overdue truths, and the kind of forgiveness that begins not with answers, but with presence. The next several days passed in a blur of uncertainty and quiet recalibration. Jason rearranged his entire schedule without telling anyone the real reason. Meetings were postponed, calls rescheduled, and for the first time in over a decade, he ignored the growing stack of contracts and proposals on his desk in favor of daily hospital visits. Every morning, he would walk into St. Gabriel's with coffee in one hand and something small in the other, coloring books for the kids, a hairbrush for Emily, a soft blanket from home that Liam had once said she missed. He didn't ask for permission. He just came. And Emily, though clearly exhausted and fragile, didn't push him away. Liam and Haley were given temporary space in a pediatric lounge nearby, supervised by a volunteer program for families in similar situations. But more often than not, they were found tucked into the corners of their mother's room, quietly reading or dozing off with their heads against the foot of her bed. Jason was careful not to intrude too much, but he was always close. He became a constant, something that could be counted on even when everything else still felt uncertain. It was during one of those late afternoons that Emily finally asked the question she had been holding in since the moment he showed up. Her voice was quiet, worn, but steady. Why didn't you ever try to find me? Jason looked up from where he sat, gently untangling the cords of a spare charger the twins had brought in. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it wasn't defensive, it was honest. I thought you didn't want to be found. You never called. I figured, whatever we had was something you left behind. I didn't know there was more. I didn't know they existed. If I had, I swear. Emily stopped him with a slow shake of her head. I didn't call because I thought I was doing the right thing. You were about to start something big. I watched you on TV that first year, building that company. I was scared you'd feel trapped if I said anything. Jason leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. I would have felt responsible. I would have been terrified. But I also might have been ready, even if I didn't know it. Maybe not good at it, but I never had a family. Not one that lasted. Maybe I wouldn't have been great, but I would have tried. Emily looked at him long and hard, and something in her face softened. You're trying now, she said quietly. And they see it. He followed her gaze to the twins, who were sharing a small notebook and giggling over something they had drawn. Jason smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. They're remarkable, he said. Smart, observant. Way braver than I'll ever be. And somehow, they're still open. They don't look at me with blame. Because I never gave them a reason to, Emily whispered. I never told them you left. I told them you didn't know. I didn't want your shadow to become a wound they carried. Jason blinked hard against the emotion rising in his throat. He hadn't earned this kindness. But she had given it anyway. He reached across the bed and touched her hand, not tightly, just enough for her to know he meant every word when he said, I don't know what comes next. But I want to build something with them. With you. Whatever that looks like. Even if it's slow. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Start by being here. Every day. That's what they need. He nodded, and for the first time, she didn't look away. That evening, as the nurses moved quietly through the halls and the city outside began to darken, Jason stayed in the chair by the window, watching Liam fall asleep beside his sister on the narrow hospital couch. He didn't leave when the lights dimmed or when the machines beeped louder than the room's conversations. He stayed. Not because he had to. Because he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. By the end of the week, Jason had fallen into a rhythm he never expected to want. His days no longer began with alarm clocks and sharp suits but with quiet visits to the hospital cafeteria where he picked up warm muffins for the twins and herbal tea for Emily. The staff started to recognize him. Some whispered his name, surprised to see a high-profile CEO slipping through the ward unnoticed, always carrying something thoughtful, always entering room 417 like it was the only place in the world that mattered. He didn't care about the rumors. For the first time in years, he wasn't living for perception. He was living for purpose. Emily was growing stronger, though her recovery was slow and unpredictable. There were good days where she could sit up and read to the twins or tease Jason for fumbling with the hospital remote. There were bad days where she barely spoke and drifted in and out of sleep, her fingers cold and her voice thin. But she never asked him to leave. And every time he thought she might be holding back, she would meet his gaze and let him see her fear, her resilience, and something else he hadn't seen in years, trust. One morning, Haley asked Jason to braid her hair. He froze, staring at the brush in her hand like it was an artifact from a different world. Mom usually does it, she said. But she's still sleepy. Liam added, she likes it tight on the sides, then twist it into the back. I can help. Jason knelt in front of her, clumsily threading strands through his fingers, fumbling more than once, but Haley didn't complain. She just smiled through the mirror when he finally got it almost right. It's better than I thought, she said. You can practice again tomorrow. Later that day, a nurse brought in a stack of paperwork and gently mentioned that if Jason wanted to be listed as an emergency contact, they would need some information. Emily was half asleep when she heard and mumbled, "Put him down. He's not going anywhere." Jason filled in every line, signed his name at the bottom, and sat for a long moment staring at the word guardian. He didn't know if he was ready. He didn't even know what that word truly meant yet. But he knew he wanted to learn. When Liam accidentally knocked over a tray of juice later that afternoon and the nurse rushed in, Jason instinctively stepped forward, shielding both children from the glass. No one asked him to. It wasn't a dramatic act. But Emily saw it. And when their eyes met, she gave him the smallest nod. Not approval. Not forgiveness. Just understanding. That night, Jason didn't go home. Instead, he unfolded the spare cot in the corner of the room and sat beside it, reading emails in the low light while the twins curled up together on the padded bench. Emily was already asleep. But before her breathing deepened, she whispered, "You can't fix everything, Jason. Just don't leave when it breaks." He didn't respond. He just reached across the space between them and laid his hand over hers, gently, like a promise that didn't need more words. It was in that moment, surrounded by beeping monitors and the quiet hush of the hospital hallway, that Jason finally understood what he had built wasn't a redemption story or a grand second chance. It was something far simpler and far harder. It was a beginning. And beginnings, he realized, were where real strength was needed most. Spring arrived gently, as if the world itself knew the people in room 417 needed a little more time to catch up. The air outside had warmed, the trees had begun to bloom again, and inside the hospital, something had shifted too. Emily was sitting up longer now, her color returning slowly, her voice gaining weight. The doctors were optimistic. She would be discharged within a week, and although she would need follow-up care, the worst was behind her. The twins, once so quiet and watchful, had begun to laugh more easily, to fight playfully over who got to sit by the window or who Jason should walk to the vending machine. They trusted him now, not in words but in the way they reached for his hand without looking, or how they leaned against him when they got tired. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always smooth. But it was real. Jason had rearranged his life entirely. He brought in someone else to manage day-to-day operations at the company, choosing instead to attend parent orientation at the twins' new school, schedule Emily's appointments, and help the kids with bedtime routines that had once been foreign to him. He was still learning how to make Haley's hair stay in place and how to assemble the science kit Liam had received for his birthday, but the children didn't care about his skill. They cared that he was there. And he always was. One evening, as the four of them sat on the floor of Emily's temporary apartment eating pizza from paper plates, Haley looked up and said, "Are we going to live together now?" The question dropped into the room so simply that none of them had prepared for it. Emily looked at Jason. Jason looked at the kids. He didn't speak immediately. Then he said, slowly and carefully, "That depends on what your mom wants." Emily wiped her hands on a napkin and looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. "I want what's right for them. And I'm not sure what that looks like yet. But I do know that I don't want to do it without you anymore." Jason exhaled, his throat tight with something he couldn't name. "I don't want to do anything without you either. And we don't have to rush. But this," he gestured around the room, to the scattered toys and half-empty juice boxes, "feels like home. And I haven't had that in a very long time." Liam smiled. Haley nodded as if the whole conversation was just confirming what she'd already decided. "Then we're a team," she said. "And teams live together." Emily laughed, and for a second, Jason saw the version of her he remembered, strong, bright, fearless. And maybe, for the first time, she saw in him a version of the man she had once believed he could become. That night, when the children were asleep and the apartment had quieted, Emily and Jason sat on the couch together, a soft blanket draped over both their legs. She rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stayed still. Her breathing was calm, and he could feel the weight of her trust settling against him. He knew now that love wasn't about grand gestures or second chances won back with flowers or apologies. It was built day by day, in the small choices, the bedtime stories, the lunches packed with too many napkins, the slow braid of forgiveness woven between everything they didn't say out loud. As the moonlight spilled in through the window and touched the floor beside them, Jason realized that he had finally arrived in the only place that had ever truly mattered. Not in a boardroom. Not on a private jet. But here, surrounded by softness and mess and the unexpected family that had changed everything. And for once, he didn't feel like he had to prove anything to anyone. He had already found the only deal worth keeping. This story's ending isn't about a perfect resolution, it's about growth, humility, and the courage to show up when it matters most. Jason doesn't get a fairy tale fix to the years he lost, but he earns something far more valuable, a real connection with the children he never knew he had, and a second chance with the woman he once left behind. What makes the conclusion powerful isn't that everything is suddenly easy, it's that he chooses to stay, to listen, and to become someone worthy of the trust slowly being returned to him. It's a quiet kind of redemption, built not on grand gestures but on the everyday choice to love, protect, and be present. And sometimes, that's the strongest kind of ending a person can earn.